Welcome to Recovery TV. We're doing a series where we are talking about sexual fantasy, and this is the third and final series. And so, in this episode, we're going to talk about what makes it so hard for couples to talk about sexual fantasy. So, stay with us. Thank you once again for joining us for Recovery TV for this third and final segment on sexual fantasy. So if you haven't watched the other two segments, please go ahead and check that out. I'll also make sure to put links to those in the cards of this video so that you can have a direct link to those. They'll also be in the description of this video. But before we get any further into it, I just want to remind you to please go ahead and subscribe to our channel and ring that bell so you can be notified when more videos are posted, and this really helps our videos get out there more. So in our previous two episodes, we talked about, is there a place for fantasy in a healthy sexuality? And in the second episode, we talked about, when does it become unhealthy, because it can. So in this one, we're going to talk about, why is it so hard to talk about to begin with?
I think that we have to start first with talking about sex in general is really challenging for people. The idea of even talking about sex to a therapist, right, who we talk about everything with our clients, that can even feel just like too intense of a vulnerability. And so to talk about fantasy, I think that just evokes an even deeper level of vulnerability.
Right. So it is, in my mind, one of the most vulnerable things you can do with your partner. I think it's even more vulnerable than sex itself,
Sure.
because you're getting into the deep desires and the thoughts and the feelings that are going on in your mind that involve having sex. So as Carrie was saying, sex and that the whole interaction and engagement of sex is so vulnerable in and of itself. Mm-hmm. But then to take that level deeper, to actually talk about what's going inside my mind, that's very vulnerable.
Very vulnerable, yeah.
And so vulnerability obviously scares us sometimes, but the thing I want to remind you guys, something I remind my clients, is that vulnerability is the lifeblood of a healthy relationship. So if you can go to those deeper levels, you potentially will experience an intimacy that you can't get anywhere else. But the thing about intimacy, something else I say a lot, is there's no such thing as risk-free intimacy. That means it might not go well sometimes when you're trying to put yourself out there, but that's what makes it worth it when it works out.
That's right. That's right. Another reason that talking about sexual fantasy can be challenging is, in general, we kind of live in a sex shame culture. And so if talking about the act of sex is taboo, then talking about where your mind goes around sex is the same thing, another level, right? Of it just going to evoke probably even somewhat unconscious levels of shame.
Absolutely. And then on top of that, I think that fantasy, or the use of your imagination for adults, is also taboo to some degree.
Sure.
So I often think of like the D&D people, Dungeons and Dragons people, who are adults who are engaging in the use of their imagination to do role-playing games, and a lot of people in our world and our culture see that as strange or weird, and I have a deep admiration for them, because I'm like, these people, they still let themselves play. They let themselves use their imagination, and that's something that we should learn from them in a lot of ways. But so just the use of our imagination gets taboo at some point. When we're kids, it's not.
Right. But there's this, you're an adult, be serious.
Yeah, it's time to grow up, basically.
To grow up. Right.
So you can see how in our culture it can just be really difficult to talk about sexual fantasy. So another reason that it's really difficult to talk about is that people often have a very strong fear of being misunderstood.
Right. The big fear is that if I take the emotional risk to come to you, my partner, and say, this is something that I think about, this is a sexual fantasy, that they're going to be labeled or judged for that fantasy. Maybe the word that they're weird or strange, or it's awkward, what's wrong with you? I think that's a deep fear that people walk around with. That
Mhm.
something about what makes that fantasy so fun and erotic says something unseemly about who
Right.
you are.
Right. And so, on the flip side of that, sometimes the person with the fantasy has a fear that their partner might read more into it that's there. So,
Mhm.
like if they have a fantasy that involves role playing or something, or dressing up, or things like that, that maybe their partner might think that you want that and not me. And that's not at all what's happening.
Right.
Sexual fantasy is actually something that's just, it's really normal. It's part of the human condition. It's there to help enhance our sex life and to enhance the intimacy that we have in our relationships.
And I think it connects back to what we've talked about in each of these episodes, which is it's evoking imagination. And by nature, by design, humans are storytellers. And that's how we relate, that's how we learn. And so fantasy is just, I think, an offshoot of our nature to tell stories. And so if we shame that, and we don't feel safe to share the stories and the ideas and the playfulness in our sex lives, then we're going to be walking around really struggling with internal shame and shutting ourselves off from potential fun and, as you mentioned earlier, even a deeper level of connection with your partner.
Right. One thing I said in one of the previous videos is that I really do believe that if someone tells you that they do not have problems in the bedroom, so to speak, that they either haven't been together long enough or they're lying. And so the sexual relationship is a very complicated relationship, and if you're in a committed relationship that has some longevity to it, there's going to be some challenges there at one point or another. So if you're experiencing some of those challenges, our encouragement is to go seek out somebody that's trained to help you with those. So like a certified sex therapist, or just somebody that has training in treating couples for sexual related issues. So to help you out a little bit, in the description of this video, I've included some links where you can search therapist directories to find therapists in your area that are trained to work specifically with couples that are having some sexual challenges.
We want to thank you guys for joining us today. We hope that this series has been helpful, has opened your mind, and maybe you'll check out some of those links and begin a journey, right, to more healthy sexuality.
Thanks.